The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell starts right now. Hey, Lawrence.
Hey, Jen, we have Ali Velshi, who's got the results from Georgia, and we're going to go straight to him.
Great. I'll look forward to watching.
And Ali, what do we have?
Yeah, let's talk. We got pretty much all the vote in Georgia District 14. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene's district that she stepped out of. So this is the race to replace her for the duration of this year. There will be a normal primary for this district in May. But right now, with 99% of the vote in, the biggest vote getter right now is the Democratic candidate, the former retired Brigadier General Sean Harris, who ran against Marjorie Taylor Greene last time. He's outperforming his own performance against her. But this is Georgia. Like most southern states, you have to get 50% or more to win. So Sean Harris advances with Clayton Fuller to the runoff, which will be on April the 7th. Here's the interesting thing. Clayton Fuller was endorsed by Donald Trump, but Colton Moore, who is the third place candidate today, is not advancing the run-up. He's sort of the Trumpier of the candidates, but you're seeing an outperformance by Sean Harris against his own numbers with Marjorie Taylor Greene the last time around. He was at about 35.5%. He's at 37.5% almost, but there are two other Democratic candidates in this race. So when you add their totals up, they're at about 1% each. That takes him almost to 40%. So now he's at 40% versus the collection of Republicans at 60%. So again, this is an improvement over what Democrats have done in this very, very Republican county. I just want to show you where this is in Georgia. It's the top left corner, the most northwestern part of Georgia. It's also the most Republican part of Georgia. It's mostly rural. It's got Rome in it. It does have a bit of the Atlanta suburbs. It's got a little bit of Cobb County over here. These are all, as you know, fairly blue districts, but it's got a little bit of Cobb County in here where Sean Harris has done very well. This was where he won last time as well. So all in all, it is an overperformance by Sean Harris over his own Democratic performance versus Marjorie Taylor Greene in the last election. These two will go to a runoff on April the 7th, Lawrence.
So, Ali, not a good night for Donald Trump. There's nothing in these results tonight from which Donald Trump can take encouragement.
That is correct. He has not overperformed versus his own performance in this county, in this district in the last election. So this is once again, it's a very, very, very conservative district, generally speaking. The Democrats have an advantage in Sean Harris. You'll remember at one point, Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't even have an opponent. Sean Harris has worked really hard in this district, and he's a former brigadier general. He sort of speaks the language of rural Georgians. So he's doing well, and he's building on his own momentum. Again, the betting markets wouldn't tell you that he's likely to become the next representative from Georgia 14. But if you look at the example of special elections across the country where Democrats have been winning by more or losing by less, this is a perfect example, not just of losing by less, but in this particular case tonight, he's the biggest vote getter in the most conservative district, in one of the most conservative districts in Georgia.
Ali Velshi, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And now we turn to one of the things on the minds of those voters today, Donald Trump's war. They don't know what they're talking about. They started a war of choice, Donald Trump's choice, and now they, in every important sense, do not know what they are talking about. Donald Trump and everyone working for him in Washington on his war continue to demonstrate every day that they are completely lost. And if they don't know what they are talking about, that means they don't know what they are doing. They don't know what they are doing in Donald Trump's war. The competition for stupidest things said today about Donald Trump's war was won by the guy who is tied with Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, for the title of most ridiculous person ever chosen by a president to negotiate peace in the Middle East. 68-year-old Steve Witkoff is a real estate developer in real life who would not have been chosen by any president of the United States to do anything, anywhere, until Donald Trump decided to send him into negotiations, not just in the Middle East, but also in Moscow with Vladimir Putin. Steve Witkoff obviously knew nothing about the Middle East or Vladimir Putin when Donald Trump chose him. And now that he's met Vladimir Putin, he still knows nothing about Vladimir Putin, as he demonstrated so embarrassingly today when Carl Quintanilla at CNBC asked him why Donald Trump decided to allow Vladimir Putin to take full advantage of the explosive increase in the price of oil. and profit off of that new price, a new price created by Donald Trump's war.
Do we think that the Russians have shared intelligence about the location of U.S. military assets? And if they have, why would we be giving waivers on Russian oil sanctions?
Well, I'm not an intel officer, so I can't tell you. I can tell you that yesterday on the call with the president, the Russians said that they have not been sharing. That's what they said. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we can take them at their word, but they did say that.
We can take them at their word. He said that. Donald Trump's clown of the day, Steve Witkoff, says we can take Vladimir Putin's word for it that Russia has not been helping Iran target attacks on American military personnel. That is the single worst thing Vladimir Putin could possibly be doing to the United States in this war. And Vladimir Putin knows it. And Vladimir Putin also knows that Donald Trump has always behaved like Vladimir Putin's trained puppy around the Russian dictator. Vladimir Putin knows that he has lied to Donald Trump to his face, and Donald Trump has then gone out to a microphone to tell the world, I believe Vladimir Putin. After credible reporting by MS Now, the New York Times, and the Washington Post that Vladimir Putin was helping Iran target the American military, which led to the deaths of 7 American soldiers and injuring 140 American soldiers, all Vladimir Putin had to do was tell Donald Trump on the phone yesterday that he didn't do it. Donald Trump might not actually be so stupid as to actually believe Vladimir Putin, but it doesn't matter because Donald Trump is deeply perverse enough to publicly claim to believe Vladimir Putin, and so is Steve Witkoff. Donald Trump's breathtakingly incompetent real estate developer buddy, Steve Witkoff, does appear to actually be stupid enough to believe Vladimir Putin and to say on television that he believes Vladimir Putin. They have no idea what they're talking about. None of them do, least of all Donald Trump, who began his war calling for the, quote, unconditional surrender, end quote, of Iran. And a day later said, we've already won, exclamation point. And now 3 days after that, 3 days after saying we've already won, no one working for him has any idea if we have won yet.
From the beginning, from this podium, we haven't stated how long it will take. Our will is endless. Ultimately, the president gets to determine the end state of those objectives. It's not for me to posit whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end.
He has no idea. He has no idea what he's talking about. The only defense secretary in history who had to promise to stop drinking to get confirmed by a Republican Senate has no idea what he is doing. He has no idea whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end. That same Secretary of Defense brought that same ignorance to the United States Senate today in a closed-door briefing about Donald Trump's war.
I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. I am left with more questions than answers, especially about the cost of the war.
And of course, the question of, is this the beginning, the middle, or the end? After the ignorance-filled briefing with Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense and Donald Trump's Secretary of State, both of whom have repeatedly been caught in public lies since the beginning of their service in those jobs, Senator Elizabeth Warren said this.
It is still the case that the Trump administration cannot explain the reasons that we entered this war, the goals we're trying to accomplish, and the methods for doing that. The one part that seems clear is that while there is no money for 15 million Americans who lost their health care, there's $1 billion a day to spend on bombing Iran.
Yesterday, Donald Trump tried to tell the world the absurd lie that the Tomahawk missile, the American Tomahawk missile, that hit a girls' school, killing 175 people, most of whom were the students at the school, was fired at the school by Iran, to which our first guest tonight, the former Navy combat pilot and former astronaut Senator Mark Kelly, said Trump has no idea what he's talking about. No, the Iranians don't have Tomahawk missiles. Dozens of children are dead. And the investigation into how this happened needs to be fast and transparent. That's how we keep this from happening again. We don't need these deflections from the president or Hegseth running his mouth about, quote, stupid rules of engagement. That was Pete Hegseth's phrase about this war. He said there are no stupid rules of engagement, meaning no rules of engagement, meaning we can fire Tomahawk missiles at girls' schools if we want to. One Republican has shown that he knows how to talk about the innocent casualties of war. Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana said this about the Tomahawk missile attack on the girls' school, quote, "It was terrible. We made a mistake. Other countries do that sort of thing intentionally, like Russia. We would never do that intentionally. I think the department is investigating it now, and I'm sorry. I'm just so sorry it happened. It was a mistake." Donald Trump's press secretary continued her mindless and relentless campaign to insult America's intelligence today. She actually said, quote, "The president is not making anything up, Nancy." Donald Trump makes things up every day about drapes and ballrooms and Tomahawk missiles and the price of gas and the price of everything and girls killed at a girls' school in Iran and the lie that Americans don't pay his tariffs. Making stuff up is what Donald Trump does. That's why Nancy Cortez of CBS asked Donald Trump's press secretary today, quote, "So is he making this up to justify his decision to go to war now?" To which Donald Trump's press secretary said, "The president is not making anything up, Nancy." If Donald Trump is speaking, he is making something up. And making it up is the charitable way to describe Donald Trump's pathological lying. Donald Trump's press secretary has the same job that Steve Early had. But Steve Early never lied. She lies every day, like every Trump press secretary before her. Steve Early created the modern version of White House press secretary when he went to work for the newly elected President Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. He served in that position for President Roosevelt every day of World War II. It was actually Steve Early who gave American news media confirmation on December 7th, 1941, that Pearl Harbor was attacked that morning by the Japanese military and the United States was drawn into World War II. The next day, in a 5-minute speech to Congress, President Roosevelt asked for a declaration of war against Japan, which Congress passed immediately. Days later, after Japan's ally, Germany, declared war on the United States, the president asked for a second declaration of war against Germany, which the Congress passed immediately. A little over a year after that, before the United States had made any significant progress in World War II, President Roosevelt announced that the only terms he would accept to end the war, at a time when there was no end in sight and no real progress in sight for the American military, the only terms the President of the United States would accept was unconditional surrender. His words, unconditional surrender. And at that point, the world knew exactly how the war was going to end. It was going to end in unconditional surrender because the President of the United States said so. No one knew when it would end. President Roosevelt didn't know when it would end. He didn't know how many years it would take, but everyone knew what it was going to look like. There would be a signing ceremony. A German official would sign a formal act of surrender. A Japanese official would sign a formal act of surrender. And today, 4 days after Donald Trump called for unconditional surrender, his White House press secretary confessed that she has no idea what that means.
It goes back to, what does that unconditional surrender look like?
She doesn't know what it looks like. Germany was the first to sign the surrender document written by the United States and dictated to Germany. Signed by the Supreme Commander, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, Dwight D. Eisenhower, he dictated it. He wrote it. He went on to become President Eisenhower. 3 months later, this is what unconditional surrender looked like in Tokyo Bay on the American Navy ship, the USS Missouri, with the Japanese generals signing the act of surrender in which the Japanese were not allowed to negotiate a single word, just like the Germans before them. That's what unconditional surrender means. That is what unconditional surrender looks like. Donald Trump's press secretary doesn't know what unconditional surrender looks like, and she doesn't know what war looks like. Steve Early understood both of those things. Steve Early won a Silver Star for bravery in combat in World War I before becoming the White House press secretary, who abolished the custom of reporters being forced to put their questions to the president in writing, and thereby created what is now the modern version of a presidential press conference. Steve Early opened the door of the Oval Office to let the reporters pour in, usually a couple of times a week, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt took their questions without hesitation and without favoritism. FDR held more presidential press conferences than any other president in history, and he always knew what he was talking about. And if he was asked a question about an obscure subject that he didn't know about, he would simply admit that he didn't know, and Steve Early would get an answer to that question later for that reporter. Americans knew they could have faith in their president's leadership during World War II. And Americans knew they could take him at his word. And now Americans know, and White House reporters know, the president makes stuff up, and he and everyone around him don't know what they're talking about. The only thing that Americans know as the missiles keep flying and people keep dying is that we cannot ever take Donald Trump at his word. Leading off our discussion tonight is former Navy pilot, former astronaut, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona. He's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Kelly, have you been able to make any more sense than any of your Senate colleagues about what this war is about tonight?
Well, Lawrence, thank you for having me on. Not yet. You know, I've been keeping a running list of about up to about 12 reasons why we are in this conflict. I haven't heard the president give any kind of an explanation for how this is good for the American people. I mean, folks are having a hard time affording, gas is obviously going up and will probably continue to do that. But rent and groceries, how does this benefit everyday Americans? We've got no explanation.
And Donald Trump is just telling people, you won't even have to be patient. The gas prices will be coming down very, very quickly, which I guess in his mind must be, sometime this week.
Right. I hope that's the case. It doesn't look that way. The Straits of Hormuz now have, it's publicly reported, have some sea mines there. That's going to be extra discouraging for ships that pass through there. 20% of the world's crude oil goes through those straits. I would expect gas prices to go up under the situation we're currently in. Hey, I don't think this president really anticipated well how this would go. He didn't have a strategic plan. He didn't even factor Russia into this entire calculation. You were talking about earlier how the Russians are going to benefit from this, and I can't imagine there was any thought to the war in Ukraine between Russia because, we have a president that doesn't think strategically, and he doesn't seem to know all that much. This talk of unconditional surrender, I think you highlighted how ridiculous it is and sounds because it's a ridiculous statement for him to make and for his press secretary to echo.
Do you believe, as Donald Trump's advisors believe, and apparently Donald Trump believes, Vladimir Putin, when Vladimir Putin says we did not help Iran target the American military?
Well, you got to assume the worst out of the Russians, and I would never take them at their word. Do not trust them in this situation. They're going to do what is in their best interest, and you have to assume helping the Iranians hurts us, hurts the U.S. military, and helps them and their ally Iran. So what Steve Witkoff said about, trust in the Russians, that's again, that is a thing that makes no sense at all.
And after Vladimir Putin's phone call with Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin publicly once again proclaimed his absolute loyalty to the Iranian regime.
Yeah, and that's not surprising. And that is not in our best interests. We are at war with Iran because this president chose this war at this moment without having a strategic plan, without having a goal, without having a timeline. And I think we really run some serious risk of this escalating into some sort of ground war. The president's rationale for this shifts almost every single day. I heard just earlier, a couple days ago, is now about oil. It's been about regime change. It's been about ballistic missiles. It's been about nuclear weapons. But if he does decide to try to remove some of the uranium, this gets into a much more challenging conflict.
Is there any way to do that without actually sending troops into Iran?
No, I mean, last summer he said after Midnight Hammer that the Iranian nuclear capability was obliterated. And myself and others, many others, tried to correct him and say, well, it was damaged. It's not obliterated. That's very hard to do. Lawrence, I've got a lot of experience, dropping weapons on things, buildings, ships, bridges, tanks. It's hard to destroy things entirely with air power. I find it interesting that it's always the guy who wasn't in the military, who hasn't dropped a bomb, who hasn't tried to destroy a target, that thinks he knows more than everybody else. That capability wasn't obliterated. And for us to completely eliminate it now, it would take a ground force to do that. It would be a complicated operation. And I am very confident that the Iranian people the IRGC would fight against our troops on the ground. I think it's also important to remember, Lawrence, that we're in this because Donald Trump ripped up a deal, the Iranian nuclear deal, that was actually working pre-2018.
Yeah, the idea that a president would rip up an agreement that Iran was complying with, all the evidence indicated they were complying with it, over this very issue, and then go to war over the issue after personally ripping up the deal is something that history has never seen before.
No, I mean, he put us in this situation. He tore up the deal. It was his decision. They were not enriching uranium beyond the level that they were held to in the agreement. After that, they began to enrich uranium further, and it's gone up and it's gone down. But now we're at the point where this new regime, the son of the supreme leader, the new supreme leader, is at some point going to make a decision if it's in the best interest of Iran to race to get a nuclear weapon. And I am extremely worried about that. That is a real risk we face today. And how unstable is the region going to be if the Iranians, if this regime actually possess a nuclear weapon? So that's the risk here. And there's only one person that put us into this situation, and he's the current occupant of the White House.
Senator Mark Kelly, thank you very much for starting off our coverage tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
And coming up, our next guest became the first United States senator in history to be tackled and detained by federal agents. His offense? Trying to ask Kristi Noem a question. California Senator Alex Padilla joins us next. Kara Lenig and Ken Dilanian's reporting for MS Now finds that about 300 FBI agents who worked mostly on national security matters have left the Bureau since President Donald Trump began his second term, including 45 who were fired, according to an internal count, by current and former FBI employees. Most of those agents hunted terrorists and spies, and at least 50 of them were in leadership roles. Current and former officials say it's a talent drain without precedent in modern bureau history, and one that leaves the nation vulnerable amid heightened terrorism threats due to the Iran war. Our next guest, Senator Alex Padilla of California, was an early critic of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. Last June, Senator Padilla became the first United States senator in history to be tackled and detained by federal agents, forcibly removed from a press conference inside a safe federal building in Los Angeles for the offense of simply attempting to ask Kristi Noem a question about ICE operations in Los Angeles at that time. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California. He's the top Democrat on the Senate Rules Committee and a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Padilla, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And remind us, what was the question that you wanted to ask of Secretary Noem that day with her invasion forces present in Los Angeles?
Sure, Lawrence, good to be back with you. And I guess it was a couple of things. Number one, what the straw that broke the camel's back was during that press conference when Secretary Noem, soon to be former Secretary Noem, not for the first time said that the mission of the Department of Homeland Security in Los Angeles was to liberate the people of Los Angeles and California from their duly elected mayor and governor. How un-American, number one. Number two was trying to ask her to share data, because we had been getting reports in my office of the people who had been targeted, the people who had been detained, the people who had been arrested, from so many of my constituents claiming these are not the dangerous, violent criminals that this administration loves to talk so much about. There are people, including legal immigrants with work visas, even some citizens who had been detained, but yes, undocumented immigrants without violent criminal conviction history. They were hard workers, they're raising families, they're paying taxes, people who were deemed essential during the COVID pandemic and deserve to come out of the shadows, not this type of abusive treatment from ICE and CBP and others. But as you saw in the video, before I could even get a question out, I was removed from that press conference. But we've learned over the course of the last 9 months that everything we suspected has turned out to be true, and the enforcement activities that started in Los Angeles have only become more cruel, more violent as they spread across the country.
We now have MS Now's reporting from Carol Leonnig and Ken Dilanian, which would be normally the subject of an investigation in the Senate Judiciary Committee, but that probably will not happen unless and until the Democrats win the Senate and control that committee. 300 FBI agents work mostly on national security matters, preventing terrorism attacks within the United States, all gone from the now Trump-controlled FBI. How vulnerable do you think that leads us?
Look, that's a very valid concern that we had before this unauthorized war against Iran. But now with the various ways in which Iran and its allies could potentially try to hit the United States back, it's even a higher priority question. But it's par for the course with this administration. They'll lie to our face about the economy, right? The State of the Union just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump claims the economy is strong when it's anything but. The cost of groceries is up. The cost of housing continues to go up. The cost of health care is spiking. You know, they're claiming our communities are safer, really, when the administration, including the Department of Justice, is so unprofessional and so misguided that career professionals are choosing to retire and choosing to leave than to follow this misdirected administration. That should tell you a whole lot. And so instead of the professional FBI agents, other staff at the Department of Justice focusing on things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, corruption, and white-collar crime, they're being redirected to, quote, immigration enforcement and really rounding up without judicial warrants people who are working as essential workers in so many industries and are trying to keep our economy chugging along.
Donald Trump has also said that he wants to shut down the United States Senate until the Republicans in the Senate pass a voting law that would require people to bring birth certificates, require people to bring passports with them, people who don't have passports, people who can't find their birth certificates in order to vote in this country. And other aspects of it include delivering all sorts of voting records to Donald Trump's government. Are the Republicans going to be able to get this through the Senate?
Look, and here's where it all comes together, Lawrence. Their record, not just Trump, but the Republican majority that's been so complicit, their record is so bad, not just unpopular, truly damaging to working families across the country. Their only hope to hold on to power this November is to change the rules and rig the elections, if you will, before the balloting has begun for the general election. This SAVE Act is anything but. If it's anything, it's a Save Trump's Ass Act with what their purpose is it's not a voter ID bill. It's a voter suppression bill, number one. It would have the effect of making it harder for eligible people to register to vote, stay registered to vote, and to actually cast their ballot, to eliminate vote by mail, which is popular amongst both Democrats and Republicans. And by the way, they continue to say the quiet part out loud. Donald Trump speaking to the House Republican conference just yesterday or the day before, saying, pass this voter ID bill, and then we will win the November elections. That's their goal. That's their goal, to make sure that only the, quote, right people are voting to elect, quote, the right leaders. We're not going to stand for it. I will die on the Hill to make sure it doesn't get out of the Senate. I don't think the votes are there, number one. Even if we do kill this bill in the Senate, which is my objective, I also anticipate Donald Trump trying to advance this through executive order or a trumped-up state of emergency. We'll fight it every step of the way. Our voting rights are just too precious.
Senator Alex Padilla, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Coming up, Donald Trump's election interference campaign has arrived in Arizona with federal subpoenas. Arizona's Secretary of State will join us next. Donald Trump has taken his election interference conspiracy to Arizona. The New York Times reports the FBI has expanded its criminal investigation into purported irregularities in the 2020 presidential election, issuing a grand jury subpoena for reams of information about voting results in Maricopa County, Arizona. The subpoena was issued in recent days to the Arizona State Senate, which oversaw a sprawling but partisan audit of the vote result that was ordered by Senate Republicans in Maricopa County in the months after Donald J. Trump lost to Joseph R. Biden. Joining us now is Arizona Secretary of State, Democrat Adrian Fuentes. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. What is your reading of this subpoena and what it might be trying to find?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Second, the subpoena is looking for all of the data that we actually thought the state Senate had turned back over to Maricopa County, and they should have after the quote-unquote audit was done. But as far as what they're looking for, frankly, Lawrence, it's a little disturbing. The Department of Justice has been demanding the personal identifying information from me on all of Arizona's voters. I've refused to give it up. They've sued me. I think this subpoena is an end around behind the judge's back unfortunately, I think they may be committing some misconduct here, trying to subvert the regular legal process, opening up a case just to investigate, quote unquote, and then grabbing the data on the backside. And if they're doing that, and that's what our investigation, which we're going to be launching, finds, we've got a real problem.
What methods do you have for investigating what Donald Trump is doing?
Well, look, we can make petitions to the court, and we can try to figure out exactly how it is that these subpoenas were issued. Unfortunately, we don't have the sorts of tools that might be available to a regular investigating or law enforcement agency. But we've got a great attorney general here in the name of Chris Mays, who has sued Donald Trump and his administration, I think 37 times already. And she's going to keep on marching. So we are at the stage right now of trying to figure out exactly what our options are. And as we work with the Attorney General's office, we will figure that out and execute appropriately to try to get to the bottom of this and protect Arizona's voters' sensitive information.
Do you have a worst case scenario of what Donald Trump's Justice Department could do with these records?
Well, I think what they might try to do is what the Privacy Act of 1974 intends to prevent, and that is create blacklists, go after folks who are on these lists, since they would have some of that personal identifying information. But I don't want to alarm anybody just yet, Lawrence. We don't know exactly what information was handed over to the FBI. I want to be reasonable here in our approach. We do not know exactly if the voter registration information in these files contains just the publicly available stuff, which is name and address, party affiliation, things of this nature, or if it has the more sensitive information that we are trying to protect, and that is mother's maiden names, for example, a whole or part of social security numbers, driver's license number, tribal ID numbers, that sensitive stuff that we don't want to surrender. So we want to be really clear in our approach. We are going to operate within the law, and we're going to make sure to do everything in our power to continue to protect Arizona's voters.
Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up, federal judge Richard Eaton has given Donald Trump a deadline for refunding his illegal and unconstitutional tariffs. Our next guest, who brought the case to the Supreme Court that defeated Donald Trump's tariffs, is owed one of those refunds. That's next. On Friday, U.S. Court of International Trade Judge Richard Eaton ruled that Donald Trump must begin to refund tariffs the Supreme Court ruled illegal and unconstitutional. The Trump Justice Department told Judge Eaton, who is an expert on international trade, that U.S. Customs and Border Protection isn't able to immediately comply with his order to refund Trump's tariffs. CNBC reports that Judge Eaton said during a court hearing, Customs knows how to do this. They do it every day. They liquidate entries and make refunds. Judge Eaton gave Donald Trump 45 days to set up an automated system to process the tariff refunds, saying, quote, these duties must now be refunded with interest, and the clock is ticking. Further interest is accumulating every day, with approximately $650 million accruing per month. If the entries are not liquidated before the end of the year, it is further estimated that $10 billion of interest will have accrued. American taxpayers will bear this financial burden. Judge Eaton told Donald Trump and his lawyers to file a report describing their process to issue the refunds by this Thursday, just 2 days from now. And yesterday, two small businesses sued Donald Trump over his 10% tariff policy that he said he was going to implement immediately after the Supreme Court ruled that his other tariffs were illegal and unconstitutional. The co-founder of one of the companies said in a statement, quote, sudden global tariffs make it harder for us to operate, harder for our partners to sell their crops, and more expensive for American families. We joined this case because trade policy shouldn't be made by inventing an economic crisis. Joining us now is Rick Woldenberg, CEO of Learning Resources, which has been making award-winning educational toys for the last 40 years. His company was the lead plaintiff in the Trump tariff case in the Supreme Court. Rick, welcome back to the program. Congratulations. First time I get to congratulate you on this big win in the Supreme Court. And I have to say, when you see a judge from the Court of International Trade, where all those judges are actually experts on international trade, when you see them handling these cases, there's no doubt about the clarity of the situation. There's Judge Eaton telling Donald Trump's lawyers, of course you know how to do this, and he's ordering them to automate it. So that sounds like you can start to expect your refund.
It's always been my expectation we would get the refund. I'm gratified by what the judge said. The Supreme Court ruled that the tariffs were unlawful, which means that the government overcollected taxes. I think Judge Eaton is really just stating what every American expects. When the government collects too much in taxes, they have to give it back with interest, and, let's get moving. And I agree with him.
And beginning as soon as people start filing their tax returns every year, the United States Treasury engages in a much bigger tax refund program than this, and it is automated, and people get their checks. They know that the Treasury knows how to do this on the income tax side, and Judge Eaton, who's an expert on the trade side, is saying they know exactly how to do it on tariffs too.
They do. We've received rebates on overpaid duties and tariffs already through their electronic system, so the system works. I think that the declaration submitted by Customs in that case defines a fairly manual process, which I think you'd have to describe as worst case. But the judge has also pointed out that the government has a lot of computers, and certainly they process refunds to the tune of many millions a year. I have heard, can't verify, that it's over 100 million refunds in total, perhaps nationwide, to the 340 million people that live in this country. Yes, they can do it, and they need to do it.
I have to say, it is so refreshing to hear a judge who's actually an expert in this dealing with the Trump lawyers. They don't get away with anything that they try in front of other judges.
Well, I agree with that too, and there have been various threats of appeals and so on, but I don't know what the legal basis would be. Honestly, the tariff was unlawful, which is an unlawful tax, which means the taxes were overcollected. There's a law on this; it's black and white, and the judge is right to say to the government, "Stop horsing around. You have to give the money back."
Rick Woldenberg, you are owed your refund, and you're owed a debt of gratitude from the people of this country for fighting for the Constitution by bringing this case to court. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Rick Woldenberg waiting for his tariff refund ordered by Judge Richard Eaton gets tonight's last word.